Hey everyone. Tonight, we're taking a darker turn. A world of plagues, punishments, and pottage awaits. We're diving into the harsh reality of life in the Middle Ages. Forget the castles, knights, and gallantry. Hollywood lied to you. You probably wouldn't survive a single sunrise. So, before we jump in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy the content. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always fascinating to see the global reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some white noise, and let's step back in time together. Welcome. You've just woken up in the year 1325. Good news, you're alive. Bad news, so are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay. It reeks of a barn floor because, well, it used to be one just a few months ago. Forget memory foam, pillows, or clean sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't seen soap since last winter, now heavy enough to rival a small cow. You squint awake as the distant church bell clangs. Think of it as the medieval alarm clock. Much louder, much more relentless. Your home? A wooden hut with a single room, no windows, and a cozy, open-plan setup where your family, animals, and insects all coexist. The smell? A pungent bouquet of stale beer, sweat, goats, and whatever else might be mold, but you hope it isn't. Stretching feels like a mistake. The air is bone-chilling, and your joints sound like ancient hinges. In medieval terms, your 22-year-old body might as well be middle-aged. Your spine protests like an old door, your knees creak like a bag of rocks being violently shaken. Getting out of bed is a risky venture. The floor is either soggy from last night's rain leaking through the thatched roof or crusty from your neighbor's wandering chickens. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the hut's ecosystem. And privacy? Forget it. Your entire family, and probably some cousin who never left, wakes up right alongside you. No bedrooms, no curtains, no structured meal times. Everything is communal. Welcome to a medieval morning, where you're never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and several humans share the same space. And that's just the start. You've somehow dragged yourself out of your medieval haystack. Well done. Now, nature calls, and it's not exactly polite. It's screaming for modern plumbing. Here's the part where you really start mourning your bathroom back home. Forget toilets, seats, paper, or even a grumbling plunger in the corner. None of that existed in the 14th century. Taking care of business was an adventure, a social experiment, and often a tiny public spectacle. If you were a peasant, your bathroom was probably a wooden bucket tucked behind the house, already overflowing because Uncle Wolf Stan had a rough night after indulging in some bad turnips. The stench? Biblical. You hold your breath, do your thing, and then comes the fun part. Dump it into the street. Yes, the street. And ideally, you'd shout "Gardai bleu," Old French for "watch out below," as you did so. Though realistically, nobody moved fast enough. Streets in medieval towns were basically open-air sewers, rivers of human waste, animal droppings, and mysterious liquids you didn't want to investigate. If you were fortunate enough to live somewhere with public latrines, congrats. You get to sit elbow to elbow with strangers in a cramped outhouse where privacy is a joke and ventilation doesn't exist. Maybe you exchange small talk, but try not to inhale too deeply. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most wiped with straw, rags, moss, or, if feeling particularly fancy, a scrap of wool. Sometimes, nothing at all, which may explain why handshakes hadn't caught on yet. And if you lived in a castle, surely it was better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a guard robe or a simple hole in the wall that dropped waste directly into the moat. Clever idea, except your enemies knew about it. And yes, attackers occasionally climbed through the waste chute. Talk about sneaking in the back way. So, whether you were a farmer or a baron, medieval bathroom breaks were a humiliation ritual. Cold, public, dangerous, and always revolting. One slip on a wet stone path, and it's face first into humanity's leftovers. And yes, you still haven't brushed your teeth, but we'll get there next. Survive the toilet? Time for breakfast, right? Something warm, comforting, maybe even tasty? Not in medieval Europe. Breakfast was grim. Forget eggs Benedict, coffee machines, or avocado toast. You squat or sit near the fire with a wooden bowl full of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to pottage. Thick, gloopy, and unappetizing. A medieval stew made from whatever ingredients were available: grains, root vegetables, maybe some beans if luck favored you. The pot was reused constantly, sometimes for days, even weeks, with fresh ingredients dumped on top of the old. Not a recipe. It was more like a slow, ongoing culinary experiment, where the results were questionable. A slab of bread so tough it could stop an arrow mid-flight. Made from coarse rye or barley, often enhanced with sawdust, crushed acorns, or whatever else was lying around. Wheat was a luxury only the rich could dream of. This loaf isn't something you slice. It's something you wrestle with. And what about drinks? Forget orange juice or a frothy oat milk latte. Nope. You're starting your day with beer. At 6 a.m. Why? Because the water is a microbial nightmare. So you down weak ale, low alcohol, high chance of survival. Kids drink it too. Nobody's thrilled, but at least it won't poison you instantly. Hoping for meat or cheese. Think again. That's a Sunday-only treat. And even then, only if your lord feels generous. Most peasants might taste meat a handful of times a year. Fresh fruit, only when in season, and not yet turned into wine. Spices? Forget it unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper could cost more than a month of wages. Salt was locked away like treasure. So you gnaw on gritty bread, sip your medieval beer, and try not to imagine the rat that probably sampled your porridge in the night. Breakfast isn't nourishing. It just happens to you. Now, with your stomach still growling, it's time to work. Like your life depends on it, because it does. First, dressing. Not that it matters much. Your wardrobe consists of one outfit. 1. A rough wool tunic or linen shift, worn daily for months, maybe years. Seasonal fashion? Non-existent. Wear it until it falls apart, or until fungus claims it. Underwear is optional. Maybe a linen undertunic if you're lucky. If not, you're going commando under layers of itchy, scratchy wool stitched by someone who clearly had no clue what a seam should look like. Washing? No machines, no soap, no dry cleaners. Your clothes are stiff, stained, and smell like a compost pile steeped in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to clean them, you'd have to haul water from the river or well, heat it over a fire, scrub with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which, in practice, shows up about 3 days a year. And shoes? If you have them, they're untreated leather, barely stitched together, offering as much support as a banana peel. Most peasants go barefoot, traipsing through mud, dung, and medieval landmines, sharp rocks, puddles of disease, you name it. Your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, everyone's invited. Living rent-free, on your very body. Everyone has them. Nobles, lazy monks, even squirming children who double as walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll find yourself scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will blink. Your skin is raw from constant rubbing, and your scalp is a battlefield of bites. Develop a rash? Tough luck. There's no dermatologist, no ointment, no one to tell you what's going on. It's probably scabies. You just endure it. And if you somehow avoid infection, that rash becomes your unwanted companion for months, like a medieval shadow. Now, dressed in misery and wrapped in itchy wool, it's time to step outside and work yourself to exhaustion. Covered in damp, scratchy clothing, itching from head to toe, it's time to show that morning smile. Except you don't. Smiling was risky business in the Middle Ages. Oral hygiene? Forget it. No toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss, no mouthwash. The closest approximation is chewing a twig or rinsing with wine or vinegar. Otherwise, your teeth are on their own, and they're failing spectacularly by your mid-20s. Your smile? Something plucked straight from a haunted crypt. Cavities are everywhere, gums swollen, and those dark stains on your teeth? Not just leftover food. That's decay. Your mouth has more rot than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, though rare, is slowly creeping into the diets of the wealthy, imported at a high cost. Nobles use it for delicate cakes or to flaunt wealth, and in doing so, rot their teeth faster than peasants. For the poor, decay is slow and steady, thanks to fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of relentless chewing. Toothaches? Consider them a background hum of life, like medieval weather. When a tooth gets infected, the remedies are brutal. Dentistry barely exists. Barber surgeons double as dentists, wielding iron hooks and pulling molars by candlelight, with zero anesthesia. Infections could easily spiral into fevers or sepsis, turning a toothache into a death sentence. That same minor ache that would land you at a pharmacy today. Back then, it could be fatal. And social life? Forget it. Kissing is risky. Halitosis, bad breath, is rampant. Everyone's mouth is a microbial battlefield. Your own morning smile could clear a room. If you're single, no one cares about your smile. They care about your land, your livestock, and whether you can survive another day. Your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing. With your teeth throbbing, it's time to step outside. Because the real work, the one that will leave your back screaming, has only just begun. Time to work. Forget offices, desks, coffee breaks, or promotions. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while working for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you spend your days toiling the Lord's land, probably for someone who wouldn't recognize you in the street. Sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. Sunday might be free, but only if there's no harvest to finish, no raiders to fight off, no infected toes to pray over. Your tools are basic: a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, whatever else you can find. Bones intact. For now, you dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine curves like the letter S. Nobody cares if you're tired. Nobody checks your mental health. And if you're a woman? Surprise. You don't just work the fields. You care for children, cook, clean, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice haven't migrated across the bed to you. Children start helping around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of surviving the next flu season. Not a farmer? Maybe you're a blacksmith, tanner, or cooper. Great. You still spend your days handling fire, chemicals, or animal guts in poorly ventilated sheds. Hey, survival. Break a bone. Too bad. Fever? Drink warm beer and keep going. Stopping isn't an option. If you don't work, you don't eat. If you don't eat, medieval Europe has a solution: replace you. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. In the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career, it's a slow-motion endurance test. And now that your back is screaming, let's talk about the weather. In medieval times, seasons weren't gentle, they were punishment. Winter arrives with no insulation, no central heating, no weatherproofing. Wooden walls have gaps big enough to toss a chicken through. Windows? Cloth, not glass. The cold isn't just uncomfortable, it's relentless. The fire in the hearth sounds cozy in theory. In reality, you don't have enough firewood to keep it going. Wood is expensive, and collecting it from the forest can get you executed. Yes, medieval law could be that strict over a stick. So you bundle into your damp wool tunic, huddle by the dying embers, and still wake up with a frozen nose, perpetually cold feet, and fingers so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just bad luck. Now, summer rolls around. Sounds better, right? Wrong. Your home becomes a clay oven. No fan, no cross breeze, no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but can't shed them. Too much skin is scandalous, and bare arms means sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. Flies swarm, drawn to your unwashed body, and last week's goat stew fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by while you try to sleep, assuming you can drown out your neighbors yelling and babies crying in the fields. The sun blazes overhead, and no sunblock exists. Hats. Only if you fashion one out of straw like a desperate scarecrow. And yes, you still have to work. Heat stroke? Just taking a bad turn. So you either shiver in winter, wondering if your toes will survive, or sweat through summer, chafing and miserable. And one thing never changes: your clothes still itch. Your food is still terrible. Your next job is still waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control, non-existent. Thirsty? Want to wash your face to escape this damp, feverish nightmare of a life? Tough luck. Water isn't your friend. It's quietly trying to kill you. That sparkling stream nearby? Looks clean, right? Spoiler, it isn't. Someone dumped a chamber pot upstream. Or maybe a dead pig is decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, a full medieval microbial army waiting in every sip. That's why everyone drank beer. Even children. Not keg stand style, of course. Just small, weak beer, low alcohol, brewed by boiling water to kill the invisible assassins lurking in town ditches. Wine was another option, but only if you were wealthy enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning before noon. Bathing? Don't even get me started. Sure, water technically existed for cleaning in the Middle Ages. But actually using it? That's adorable. Because back then, people were convinced that bathing opened up your pores like tiny disease doors and invited sickness right inside. Scrubbing off your built-up crust of medieval grime wasn't cleansing. It was apparently removing your natural armor. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly turned into hubs for gossip, scandal, and extracurricular activities best left unmentioned. Naturally, the church swept in like, absolutely not. And many of those places vanished faster than your will to live in winter. And if you still wanted to bathe, prepare for a full medieval chore list. Haul water from the well. Heat it over a fire that takes forever to start. Dump it into a wooden tub that leaks like a jealous neighbor. Then pray no one dips in before you. Or worse, after. Rainwater was no better. Stored in open barrels where birds relieved themselves, bugs laid eggs, and moss had a thriving career. Refreshing, right? So whether you're drinking it, washing with it, or trying to water crops, medieval water is less source of life and more spin the wheel of gastrointestinal doom. One unlucky sip and suddenly you're sweating on a straw mattress, regretting every decision you ever made. Next time you take a sip of tap water, maybe say a quiet thank you to your ancestors. Hydration wasn't a guarantee, it was a gamble. But let's say you did drink the water. Or maybe you just kicked a rock shaped like fate. Either way, congratulations, you're sick. Time for a doctor. Except you live in an era where medicine is basically torture wrapped in scripture. Diagnosis? Easy. Everything from a sniffle to a shattered leg is blamed on your humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The medieval version of a biological soup that must remain perfectly balanced. Feeling feverish? Clearly too much blood. The solution? Drain some out. Yes, bloodletting. And yes, barbers often did it. Imagine going in for a trim and leaving several ounces lighter. Feeling depressed or anxious? That's obviously excess black bile. The remedy might be a purge, a herbal cleanse, or just silent prayers while everyone quietly starts preparing your funeral arrangements. Break a bone. Get a serious wound. Oh, you're in trouble now. There's no anesthetic unless you pass out midway. Surgery is performed with tools that haven't been cleaned since some knight used them as a bookmark during the Crusades. They heat instruments over flames, but not to sterilize them, just so they look intimidating. Antibiotics? Centuries in the future. Germ theory? Doesn't exist. Disease is either caused by bad air or because God thinks you've been misbehaving. Got stomach pains? Must be moral corruption. Better confess and throw up at the same time. If things get worse, expect more leeches, questionable potions, crushed bugs, and a priest hovering nearby, just in case you need to transition into the ultimate cure, death. And if, by some miracle, you actually survive, everyone assumes it was God's mercy. The doctor claims full credit, and the leech, yes, the one still attached to your arm, gets promoted. In the Middle Ages, medicine wasn't really about curing you. It was about surviving the cure. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time for one of the few joys left, food. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, dreaming of a warm meal. Bad news. That meal is probably trying to kill you. Food preservation barely exists. No fridge, no freezer. Just salt, smoke, or the vague hope that the winter air keeps things edible. If you're lucky enough to have meat, it's been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinating in questionable brine, possibly shared with a rat or two. Bread is the backbone of the medieval diet. Even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, peasants stretch it with bark, sawdust, or even clay. Rye brings its own bonus. Ergot, a fungus that can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. Basically, you're eating bread laced with a mix of LSD and tetanus. Vegetables, only if they're in season. Turnips, however, are eternal. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage. A mysterious, swampy stew that might have been simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral. Fruit, seasonal, rots quickly, and sugar is a luxury hoarded by the rich to flaunt their blackened teeth. Dairy is equally risky. Fresh milk sours within hours. Butter and cheese last longer, but are full of bacteria. People eat them anyway because the alternative is chewing your own boot leather. And spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, worth more than gold for a peasant. Most seasoning comes from onions, salt, and occasional pain. Meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with despair. But food isn't just dangerous to your health. It's political. Game animals belong to the Lord. Caught poaching a rabbit? You could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. Your dinner could literally get you hanged. So you sit down by flickering firelight, say your grace, and eat anyway. Every bite is a gamble, but you do it because in the Middle Ages, food isn't nourishment, it's a test. Evening falls. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't relax. God is watching. So is the priest. And so is your neighbor Agnes, ready to tattle if you miss Mass. Religion in medieval Europe isn't a part of life, it is life. The church sets the calendar, enforces the laws, dictates education, and oversees your milestones. Birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as a spiritual landlord, and you're perpetually behind on rent. Every day revolves around the church bells. Morning, noon, and night. They ring, not as a courtesy, but as a constant reminder that missing a prayer is a sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Think impure thoughts about your neighbor's wife in a dream? Double sin. Hell isn't just a concept. It's vivid, terrifyingly real. Priests describe it in gruesome detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't frighten you, eternal damnation certainly will. Reading the Bible yourself isn't an option. It's all in Latin, reserved for monks, clergy, and the occasional noble brat too privileged to touch dirt. You rely entirely on the church to interpret scripture. So if the priest declares your crop failure as punishment for laziness in prayer, your response is simple: kneel harder. Tithes take 1/10 of everything you produce. Grow wheat? Give wheat. Raise chickens? Give eggs. Have nothing? Congratulations, you're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Then there are holy days. Dozens of them. They sound like breaks, but they're not. They're for Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and internalizing the idea that happiness is dangerous. Question the church? That's hazardous. Heretics are burned, blasphemers drowned, skeptics reformed by other, less pleasant methods. So you follow the rituals, bow, chant, pray, and hope your dirt-covered soul might earn a spot in paradise, assuming the priest approves. God may be merciful, but the church? Not so much. Now, imagine all that suffering compounded by being a woman. Filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, subservience, and near invisibility. Medieval womanhood is hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. Life paths for girls are essentially set at birth. Marry young, produce heirs, manage the household. Education? Rare, unless you're noble and sent to a convent. Intellectual growth generally halts once you learn to churn butter. Marriages? Arranged early. Being betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14 wasn't unusual. Love wasn't part of the equation. Land, livestock, and alliances were. Your opinion? Irrelevant. Once married, you're your husband's property. Your duties: produce heirs, run the household, and don't complain. Complain and risk being branded a nag, or worse, a witch. That label could come with complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local trends. Childbirth is a lottery with the odds stacked against you. No prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives try their best, but even minor complications can be fatal to mother, child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive even half that. And once the baby arrives, your work doesn't end. You now have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut and are expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. Unmarried, suspicious, widowed, vulnerable, outspoken, dangerous. Women who didn't conform, especially those with herbal knowledge, were prime targets for accusations of witchcraft. Maybe you had a strong personality. Maybe you just looked at someone the wrong way on a rainy Tuesday. Even in church, your role is restricted. Nuns lived under rigid rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual value always ranked below men. In short, if you were a woman in the Middle Ages, your job was simple: endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer quietly. Ideally, you did all of this with a smile, because even in an era of universal misery, women were expected to suffer gracefully. By now, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and maybe even a goat. But just when you think the day can't get any worse, violence shows up. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Peace. Rare. Law and order. Mostly hoping your local lord isn't in a foul mood. Violence is everywhere. In the home, the streets, the battlefield, church disputes, even in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common. Punishment is brutal. Justice is more theater than protection. Steal a loaf of bread? Lose a hand. Accused of lying? Your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much? A metal bridle with a bar in your mouth will correct you. Serious accusation, heresy, theft, witchcraft? Prove your innocence through torture. Welcome to trial by ordeal. Stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. Heal without infection in 3 days. You're innocent. If not, guilty. Tossed into a river. Sink. You're innocent and probably dead. Float. You're guilty and still punished. Think of it as a medieval game show where survival is the prize and the host is rooting against you. Executions, public events, hangings, beheadings, burnings. Crowds cheer. Snacks are sometimes brought. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Domestic violence? Normal. Husbands disciplining wives and children was expected. Street fights? Common. Offend a noble, glance at their horse wrong, and you could be beaten. War simmers constantly. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone is always marching off to stab another in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of medieval society. It is society. Life is fragile, and justice is arbitrary. Your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. Walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and trust no one with a club. By now, you've survived lice, leeches, filth, starvation, misery, and the constant threat of public humiliation. But the final chapter of most medieval lives remains the same: an early, unglamorous death. If you make it past 40, congratulations, you're basically a celebrity. People might even call you the old one, which isn't a compliment so much as recognition that you've defied staggering odds. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, but that figure is skewed by rampant infant mortality. Nearly half of all children never reached age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or just one harsh winter was often enough to end a life. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no safety nets. If you survived childhood, adulthood hit like a wall. Work started as soon as you could walk, and by 25, your joints creaked like the doors of a monastery. You might be missing teeth, fingers, or most of your optimism. Women faced particularly deadly odds with childbirth, one of the leading causes of death in medieval life. No anesthesia, no modern medicine, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand as you struggled on a straw-stuffed cot. Men weren't safe either. Farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, or a misadventure during a crusade could claim you. Even a simple walk to the market carried risks: bandits, angry tax collectors, or a stray arrow from a nearby skirmish. Death could also arrive quietly, from plague, famine, or a moment of bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. When you died, burial was swift. No embalming, no fancy coffin, just a shallow hole, a few whispered prayers, and a mound of dirt. Sometimes space in the churchyard ran out, so you got whatever patch was left. Life in the Middle Ages was short, brutal, and constantly shadowed by death. There was no retirement. You simply stopped showing up. So how was your day? You woke up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with pure imagination, nearly fainted from hunger, worked until your spine begged for mercy, scratched your way through lice and fleas, prayed you didn't get plague, and narrowly avoided a public execution for poaching a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Forget it. The romanticized Middle Ages, gallant swordsmen, ladies in towers, heroic battles, candlelit feasts, is a fairy tale. Reality was gritty, harsh, and brutally unfair. Hierarchy ruled everything. Born poor? You stayed poor. Born rich? Congratulations, you survived slightly better, but even nobles were never truly safe. Castles were drafty, stone larders swarmed with fleas, smoke filled the halls, and politically arranged marriages awaited you. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying from an infected splinter or in a skirmish. Not exactly luxury. The simpler times weren't simple at all, they were relentless. Everything took longer, everything hurt more. Every act, from childbirth to chewing a bite of bread, carried consequences. Life wasn't leisure, it was survival. And if you managed a rare, quiet moment to think, dream, or imagine something better, there was little you could do. No upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google your symptoms or make a plan. You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a few miles of your birthplace. Rashes, lice, famine, disease, they were all part of the package. Yet here's the remarkable part. People still laughed, sang, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn. Even in the darkest chapters, they carved out moments of light. So tonight, when you slip into your warm, clean bed with plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, take a quiet moment to thank both the modern world and the ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudal tyranny, so you wouldn't have to. Long before she became Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, icon of reform, and symbol of ambition, she was simply Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt-Zerbst, born in 1729. Daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family in Pomerania, her duchy offered little in terms of power. But Sophie had something no title could provide: razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating, obsessed with status rather than affection. Her father, a Prussian officer, was distant and formal. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke several languages, and learned to study a room before speaking, skills that would later become essential to her survival in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia began searching for a bride for Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond her own borders. Peter was of German descent, and Elizabeth wanted a foreign bride who would be pliable and grateful. Sophie fit perfectly: noble blood, Lutheran faith, soon to be abandoned, and a reputation for grace and humility. At just 14, Sophie was summoned to Russia. In 1744, she arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg, dressed in thin German fabrics and carrying a practiced diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece, but Sophie had her own game in mind. Determined to be accepted in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. Sophie wasn't just changing religion. She was burning bridges, stepping into a foreign empire with no way back. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have imagined what came next. From that moment, she ceased being a pawn and began plotting her ascent to queen, setting the stage for revolution, enlightenment, and empire. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to cement her place in Russian royalty. Instead, it quickly felt more like a gilded cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was far from the dashing prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he cared more about staging miniature battles in his chambers than running an empire or showing any affection to his new wife. Some accounts suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and harbored resentment toward the Russian court that had taken him in. Catherine, on the other hand, embraced Russia with relentless determination. She learned the language, studied its history, and memorized Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This wasn't just a personal mismatch, it was political. The Russian court was a nest of vipers, gossip, paranoia, and ruthless power plays. Empress Elizabeth still ruled absolutely, though her health was failing. Everyone knew a transition was imminent, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was under constant surveillance. Her letters were read, her friendships monitored, her every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother, still whispering for foreign interests, or even her own servants. Alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She learned to play the court's deadly games subtly, cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and earned a reputation for dignity and restraint, a sharp contrast to her husband's childish tantrums and contempt for Russian customs. She immersed herself in Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu, quietly building a vision not just for herself, but for Russia, a nation founded on strength, education, and reason. Yet there was a problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained trapped, a powerless wife to a man wholly unfit to rule. She waited, watched, and planned, knowing the Russian throne would not simply be inherited, it would have to be seized. After nearly 2 decades of careful maneuvering, Catherine saw her chance and acted with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died. Peter III ascended the throne, but his reign began collapsing almost immediately. He alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and openly praised Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated clergy, and even spoke of divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, already uneasy, turned against him. Generals loyal to Catherine whispered in corridors. Ordinary Russians, devout and patriotic, viewed Peter as a foreign puppet mocking their traditions. Watching it all unfold, Catherine made her move, and the throne was within her grasp. In July of that same year, while Peter was away at his summer residence, Catherine executed a bloodless coup d'état. Key military officers, including her lover Gregory Orloff and his influential brothers, threw their support behind her. Riding through the streets of St. Petersburg in full imperial regalia, she was proclaimed Empress Catherine II and secured the loyalty of the powerful imperial guard. Peter, unprepared and isolated, surrendered without resistance. Within days, he was taken into custody and soon after, died under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was reported as a fatal illness, hemorrhoids or colic, but unofficial accounts suggested murder. Catherine had become empress, not by birth, not by marriage, but through sheer will, intellect, and audacity. A foreign-born woman, with no legitimate claim, had seized the Russian throne without firing a single shot. Yet the real challenge lay ahead. Gaining power was one thing, holding it was another. Catherine needed to transform her daring takeover into a lasting legacy. Would the Russian people accept her? Could the nobility respect her? Could she unify the empire without suffering the same fate as her husband? Catherine understood that power earned through intrigue could vanish just as quickly as it was acquired. She resolved to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary. Thus began her evolution from cautious conspirator to reforming empress, one who would redraw borders, embrace Enlightenment ideas, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. Securing the crown was not her final goal. She aimed to transform Russia politically, militarily, and intellectually. While Peter had idolized Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine admired Voltaire, Diderot, and the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the notion that a monarch, while absolute, should serve the people. Catherine didn't just study Enlightenment philosophy, she applied it. For over 15 years, she corresponded directly with Voltaire, flattering him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and even purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she studied law, debated reforms, and drafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign was marked by ambitious efforts to codify Russian law. In 1767, she convened the Legislative Commission, a monumental project aimed at rewriting Russia's legal code. Catherine's draft served as both a legal framework and a subtle political manifesto. It championed equality before the law, condemned torture, and emphasized the ruler's duty to serve the common good. In the context of 18th century Russia, a vast, feudal, and deeply conservative society where nobles clung to serfdom, it was radical. Enlightenment ideals had to contend with reality, but Catherine was determined to make them endure. Catherine understood the delicate balance required to govern effectively. As she pushed for reforms, she proceeded with caution. She abolished certain forms of torture, broadened access to secular education, and established schools and libraries. Yet she also reinforced the nobility's control over their serfs to maintain their loyalty. Catherine's reign was a constant balancing act, outwardly a philosopher queen, inwardly a pragmatic empress. She navigated a tightrope between Enlightenment ideals and the harsh realities of Russian politics, between the salons of Paris and the corridors of Moscow. Her vision for Russia was ambitious, but always measured. Catherine didn't seek to make Russia European. She sought to make it modern, on her terms. Reform came with both an iron hand and a velvet glove. But her ambitions went beyond internal development. She aimed to expand Russia's influence, building an empire that commanded respect, fear, and admiration. Where Peter the Great had merely opened a window to the west, Catherine sought to tear down the walls. Under her leadership, Russia's borders stretched farther than ever. Her military campaigns were not simply defensive, they were transformative. One of her most notable efforts targeted the Ottoman Empire. The wars of the 1760s and 1770s were as much about asserting dominance as they were about territory. Catherine positioned herself as the protector of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule and the rightful arbiter of Eastern Europe. Generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin led Russia to capture critical regions, including Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and strategic warm water ports long coveted by Russian rulers. Each victory sent a clear message. Russia was no longer a distant, backward state. It had arrived as a continental power. Catherine's ambitions extended westward as well. She orchestrated the partitions of Poland alongside Austria and Prussia, gradually absorbing its territories. By the Third Partition in 1795, Poland had vanished from the map, adding vast lands and millions of new subjects to the Russian Empire. But conquest for Catherine wasn't only about armies. She colonized with ideas, building cities, opening trade routes, and inviting German settlers to cultivate Russian farmland. From the icy Baltic to the sunlit Black Sea, her empire became a diverse and dynamic mosaic, all overseen personally by Catherine. Critics accused her of greed and imperialism, but to Catherine, expansion was destiny. She believed that a ruler's greatness was measured not only by ideas, but by borders. Her goal was not merely to govern Russia, but to reshape it into a civilized empire, respected by its peers, feared by its enemies, and loyal to her alone. Yet Catherine's genius and power were matched by the intrigue of her private life. Behind the palace doors, Her personal affairs became legendary. She maintained a carefully chosen circle of lovers, often decades younger, frequently attractive, and sometimes wielding political influence. Her romantic life, much like her reign, was deliberate, strategic, and impossible to ignore. Catherine never hid her relationships. In fact, she often rewarded her lovers with titles, estates, and pensions if they served her well. If they didn't, they were quietly dismissed, sometimes with a polite farewell and a generous retirement. Among the most significant of these was Grigory Potemkin, a man whose brilliance matched his daring. Their connection blurred the line between romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians even speculate that they may have secretly married. Together, Catherine and Potemkin directed military campaigns, colonization projects, and the development of southern Russia. Potemkin was more than a lover. In many ways, he was her co-ruler. Still, Europe was captivated by scandal. Satirical pamphlets painted Catherine as lustful, reckless, and unhinged. After her death, the rumors only intensified, the most infamous being the grotesque and completely false tale involving a horse, spread by her enemies to sully her reputation. Why such obsession? Simple. Catherine was a woman who wielded authority unapologetically in a world that expected female rulers to be either saintly virgins or tragic martyrs. She refused to play their roles. She lived, loved, and ruled on her own terms, and that independence made her dangerous. Ironically, while critics labeled her immoral, Catherine herself approached love and sexuality with thoughtfulness. She believed pleasure was a natural part of life, and that personal relationships could coexist with political responsibility. Her liaisons were often strategic. She surrounded herself with men who were loyal, capable, and politically useful. And when they outlived their usefulness, she let them go, graciously, sometimes with a smile and generous compensation. Catherine's personal life did not undermine her rule. It was part of her power. Her charm, intellect, and strategic relationships reinforced her authority and ensured her dominance in Russian politics. Yet her reign was not without danger. In 1773, a threat emerged in the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemelian Pugachev. He was no ordinary rebel. Claiming to be Peter III, Catherine's deceased husband, he asserted he had survived the coup and now sought to reclaim the throne. The claim was absurd, but for Russia's exhausted and oppressed peasantry, truth mattered less than hope. Pugachev promised liberation, an end to serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common people. His words ignited a fire along the Volga, attracting Cossacks, peasants, and old believers to his cause. In a nation where inequality between nobility and serfs had grown unbearable, his promises sounded like salvation. The Pugachev rebellion quickly escalated into the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns were seized, fortresses fell, and nobles were killed. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the empire itself might crumble. Catherine, though shaken, did not falter. This was not a foreign threat she could negotiate with diplomacy or defend with a few treaties. This was a revolt from within, her own people rising against the system she ruled. She responded decisively, dispatching professional military forces to crush the rebellion and reassert order across her vast empire. Ruthlessly, Catherine crushed the rebellion. Yemelian Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1774. He was captured, paraded in an iron cage, and ultimately executed in Moscow, a grim spectacle meant to warn anyone tempted to rise against the throne. In the aftermath, Catherine intensified her grip on power. Her early dreams of emancipating the serfs quietly receded. The uprising had revealed the stark limits of Enlightenment ideals in a nation still bound by feudal chains. From that moment on, Catherine leaned heavily on the nobility, securing their loyalty by granting them even greater authority over their serfs. It was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now placed stability above philosophy. Reforms were measured, surveillance intensified, and even the slightest murmur of dissent was extinguished before it could grow. Pugachev had lost his head, but the warning of rebellion lingered, an ever-present reminder that inequality carried the seeds of unrest. By the time Catherine approached the twilight of her life, she had ruled Russia for over 30 years, the longest reign of any female monarch in the nation's history. From the moment she seized power, she had defied expectations, reshaped the empire, and redefined what it meant to be both a woman and a ruler. Under her leadership, Russia emerged as a true European powerhouse. Its territory expanded by more than 200,000 square miles, including Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches along the Black Sea coast. These victories were not merely military. They were strategic, securing warm water ports, reshaping trade routes, and asserting Russia's influence in Europe. Catherine's legacy extended beyond borders. She transformed culture and learning, founding the Hermitage Museum and building one of Europe's greatest art collections. She corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers, cultivated an intellectually vibrant court, and modernized education by establishing schools for girls. She even championed medical progress, introducing smallpox inoculation and publicly receiving the vaccine herself, a courageous act in her era. Yet her reign was full of contradictions. While she admired Enlightenment ideas, she never freed the serfs. In fact, she expanded serfdom into new territories. Her reforms, though impressive, were largely top-down, designed to modernize the empire without fundamentally altering its feudal structure. Still, Catherine's rule brought stability, ambition, and a carefully managed balance of power. She governed not by divine right, but through sheer will, political genius, and relentless calculation. She was called a usurper, a tyrant, a reformer, a seductress, but above all, she was effective. When Catherine the Great died in 1796, she left Russia larger, wealthier, and more formidable than it had been in centuries. She bequeathed not just an empire, but a legend, one that would endure long after her reign ended. Catherine did more than merely reign. She commanded with intellect, strategy, and an unflinching grasp of history. In doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a legend. Her power, her territorial expansion, and her enduring influence turned her into a symbol of audacity. At her core, Catherine the Great was a woman navigating a man's world, reshaping it entirely in her own image. Beneath the gilded portraits and official decrees was someone acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. She was not Russian by birth. She seized the throne through a coup, ruling an empire unprepared for a female sovereign. And yet, she did not merely survive, she flourished. Catherine refused to be decorative. She read voraciously, wrote continuously, and pursued knowledge with relentless discipline. Her days were packed with reports, correspondence with foreign leaders, state documents, and constant court intrigue. The throne was her instrument, and she wielded it with precision. Yet, despite the grandeur and power, she lived with isolation. Surrounded by courtiers, lovers, and artists, she trusted very few. Even her son Paul, whom she kept distant from state affairs, became a source of anxiety, a potential threat to all she had built. Her deepest emotional bond had been with Grigory Potemkin, a partnership that blended love, politics, and strategy. His death in 1791 left a void she never fully healed. Catherine carefully crafted her public image: enlightened monarch, warrior, patron of the arts, mother of Russia, but behind every persona was a woman who had endured betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, yet persisted. When she died in 1796, Catherine left a transformed empire, but also lingering questions. Could she have done more to abolish serfdom? Were her reforms genuine or politically compromised? History remembers her as Catherine the Great, though she never claimed the title herself. It was never about perfection. It was about power, seized and wielded on her terms. In an era where women were expected to defer, she did not just wear a crown. She redefined what it meant to deserve one. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in the humid jungles of southern Mexico, the ancient Maya world whispered its own secrets. Towering limestone temples rose above the canopy, eroded by centuries, yet still concealing mysteries. In 1994, a team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was surveying a modest pyramid adjacent to the famed Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque. The burial site of the mighty King Pacal was not expected to yield surprises until a hidden sealed chamber beneath the structure drew their attention. Untouched by looters, it remained pristine. Inside, they discovered a stone sarcophagus, silent and heavy with centuries of history. When the lid was lifted, a red cloud of powdered cinnabar, mercury sulfide used in ceremonial rites, rose into the air. Within that crimson haze lay the carefully interred skeleton of a woman, buried with reverence and care, a testament to ritual and power long forgotten. Her skeleton was delicate yet remarkably preserved. A jade mask still adorned her face, and her body was surrounded by an array of funerary treasures, necklaces, diadems, air spools, all meticulously crafted from jade and shell. Every detail of the burial radiated royalty, yet there was no inscription, no glyphs to reveal her identity. It was one of the most lavish female interments ever discovered in Mesoamerica, and yet it remained a profound mystery. Why had she been covered in red powder? Who exactly was she? A queen, a priestess, or perhaps the wife of King Pacal? The researchers dubbed her the Red Queen, a name that endured. Even with modern forensic tools, her precise identity eluded scientists. They could only determine that she had lived around the 7th century, during the golden age of Palenque. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers was deliberately hidden, untouched, and isolated, signaling extraordinary status. Her burial was far more than ceremonial. It was deeply spiritual. She was not meant to be remembered through inscriptions or written records. Her memory was preserved through ritual, color, and enigma. The most striking feature of the tomb was the thick layer of powdered cinnabar covering the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, and the offerings. The red dust clung like blood to stone. For the Maya, this was deliberate. Cinnabar, derived from mercury sulfide, was sacred and potent. Its vivid red hue symbolized blood, rebirth, and the vital force connecting mortals to the divine. Red represented sunrise, sacrifice, and life emerging from death. The ritual was both symbolic and transformative. Coating the deceased in cinnabar was meant to prepare her not merely for burial, but for passage into the spiritual realm. There was an inherent danger in this ritual. Cinnabar is toxic. Prolonged exposure can cause mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, or even death. While the Maya may not have fully understood its chemistry, they recognized its power. Only extraordinary individuals were treated with such rituals. Few were covered in cinnabar, save for rulers or those of immense spiritual significance. King Pacal, whose pyramid dominates Palenque, was similarly enshrouded in the red powder, emphasizing the sacred link between him and the Red Queen. Her skull rested atop a bed of jagged shell, a symbolic layer of protection. Surrounding her bones were ritual objects, obsidian blades, miniature jade figurines, and ceremonial needles, suggesting rites performed during her life or in her honor. Every element of her burial marked her as no ordinary mortal. She was a figure of reverence, power, and profound mystery, a woman elevated through ritual to near-divine status. In death, every element of her tomb spoke volumes without a single word. It told a story of power hidden in secrecy, a woman prepared to enter the underworld not silently, but through ritual, enveloped in the deep red of sacrifice. Around the Red Queen's crimson-stained remains lay a world of quiet reverence, punctuated only by the shine of jade, shell, and obsidian. These objects were far more than mere decoration. They were offerings, carefully selected to accompany her on the journey to the Maya afterlife. Heavy jade necklaces rested at her sides, cold yet luminous even after 3 centuries beneath the earth. To the Maya, jade was sacred, a symbol of eternal life, of maize's green vitality, the breath of the jungle, and the favor of the gods. Only the elite were granted burials with jade. The Red Queen's adornments draped her chest, her wrists, marking her as someone of immense influence. perhaps even divine favor. One of the most arresting elements was the jade funerary mask over her face. Unlike the grandiose gold masks of Egypt, this one was subtle, crafted from dozens of tiny mosaic tiles, each carefully arranged to follow the contours of her skull. The mask served a ritual purpose, protecting her soul, preserving her identity, and presenting her as divine to the gods. Scattered around her remains were bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts. These may have been ritual implements or markers of her rank as priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. One delicate bone pin bore a faint but deliberate engraving, a small echo of her voice lost to time. Along the edges of the tomb, ceramic vessels remained sealed, likely once containing food, drink, or incense to sustain her spirit on its journey. The Maya believed the afterlife was perilous and complex, and these items were not luxuries, they were necessities. The tomb's contents were deliberately restrained. No gold, no chariots, no extravagant displays. Each object carried spiritual significance, forming a map for the soul and demonstrating how the Maya viewed death not as an end, but as a transition of power. The Red Queen was not buried to fade into oblivion. She was prepared for ascension, her tomb a testament to her status and ritual importance. Yet the Red Queen left behind one haunting mystery. No name, no inscriptions, no glyphs on her sarcophagus or the walls. Her identity remained a puzzle. Scholars pieced together clues, the leading theory suggesting she was Sak-Kuk, the wife of the famous King Pakal. Known today as Pakal the Great, he was one of Palenque's most renowned rulers. Sak-Kuk was born into nobility, married young, bore several sons of high status, and held crucial ceremonial roles during her husband's reign. If anyone could merit such an extraordinary burial, it was her, a queen whose life and death were entwined with ritual, reverence, and power. The Red Queen's tomb was located just a few feet from King Pakal's grand burial within the Temple of the Inscriptions. This proximity seems intentional, a deliberate pairing of husband and wife, rulers even in death. Then there's the striking use of cinnabar. Only two burials in Palenque, Pakal's and the Red Queen's, showed such heavy cinnabar coverage, suggesting this was no coincidence. Yet the mystery deepens. DNA tests conducted on both sets of remains were inconclusive. While the woman's bones showed no direct maternal link to Pakal, this didn't rule out a spousal relationship. After all, marriage doesn't require shared blood. Some scholars speculate she could have been Pakal's powerful mother, who ruled Palenque until he came of age. Others propose she may have been a high priestess, a sister, or a royal ancestor whose name has been lost to history. The strongest evidence points to Sak-Kuk, queen by title, mother of kings, and spiritual partner to Pakal. The absence of her name may not have been accidental. In Maya cosmology, the soul's endurance was less about monuments and more about ritual, symbolism, and connection to the earth. In this way, the Red Queen remains suspended between legend and history, a woman remembered not in stone, but in scarlet and silence. To understand her, we must understand her world. Maya women, particularly those of royal blood, wielded far more influence than often realized. Politics was frequently a family affair, and royal women were far from passive. They acted as diplomats, priestesses, and power brokers, conducting sacred rituals, sponsoring temples, and maintaining dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political capital, used to forge alliances and secure claims to the throne. Sak-Kuk, mother of Pakal the Great, exemplifies this power. When the throne was left vacant, she assumed authority as queen regent until her son came of age. She wasn't merely a placeholder. She ruled, issued decrees, and oversaw major construction projects. Without her guidance, Pakal's rise may never have occurred. She was not unique. Across the Maya world, inscriptions and murals show women performing important ceremonies, engaging in warfare, diplomacy, and sometimes ruling outright. They are depicted in full regalia, elaborate headdresses, standing beside kings as equals, or occasionally, even above them. Their stories were once etched in glyphs, their names remembered through generations, until much of that memory faded. By the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived, the colonial lens often portrayed indigenous women as silent and subordinate. Yet archaeology tells a different story, one of intricate gender roles, where power was negotiated, performed, and earned. This perspective casts the Red Queen in a profoundly new light. She may not have ruled openly by title, but her burial, rich, sacred, and positioned beside Pakal, suggests she was a cornerstone of royal authority. Her jade funerary mask was more than decoration. It symbolized identity, power, and sanctity, protecting her legacy in death. Her lineage may have been the glue holding Palenque's dynasty together. In life, she was more than a queen, a guardian of sacred bloodlines, a ritual authority, and a bridge between mortals and the divine. Though nameless to us, she was never voiceless in her own world. The Red Queen's tomb was more than a grave. It was architecture layered with Maya cosmology, ritual meaning, and deliberate design. Her body rested inside Temple 13, one of the smaller pyramids at the heart of Palenque. Its proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, the resting place of Pakal the Great, is telling. These structures were not haphazard. Their placement was guided by astronomy, myth, and dynastic legacy. Though modest in scale compared to its towering neighbor, Temple 13 conceals a profoundly intimate secret, a sealed, untouched crypt, perfectly preserved for over 3 centuries. The tomb lies deep within the temple's core, accessible only via a steep, narrow staircase. The descent itself feels symbolic, a ritual journey into the underworld. The chamber is stark, composed of cut stone, devoid of glyphs or murals. There are no ornate carvings narrating her story. Perhaps that silence was intentional. This space was not meant for the living to interpret, but for the dead to undergo transformation. At its center sits her limestone sarcophagus, echoing Pakal's elaborate coffin nearby. While Pakal's lid is famously engraved with depictions of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb is more introspective. The focus is inward, on her body, the cinnabar that envelopes it, and the ritual of death itself. Subtle architectural details hint at meaning. The tomb aligns east to west, mirroring the sun's passage from life to death. Small yet powerful, the chamber feels deliberate, personal, and sacred, a carefully crafted space for a woman revered in her time. Maya pyramids were more than monuments. They were bridges between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. To be interred within one was to transcend the human plane. The Red Queen's tomb was no afterthought. It was a meticulously designed shrine, a space where death became transformation. Her bones lay encased in stone, her essence preserved in cinnabar, and her legacy embedded in the very architecture. The temple itself speaks without words, proclaiming her significance to the ancient Maya. Death was not viewed as an end, but as a sacred threshold, a passage into the underworld known as Salba. For the Red Queen, this journey was simultaneously spiritual, political, cosmological, and ritualized. Maya burial rites were elaborate, steeped in myth, and designed to guide the deceased safely through the treacherous layers of the underworld. Salba was no gentle afterlife. It was a labyrinth of darkness, rivers of blood, deadly trials, and gods of death. Only those properly prepared, ritually equipped, and spiritually empowered could navigate it successfully. The Red Queen was carefully interred, wrapped in cinnabar, encased in stone, and surrounded by offerings. These objects signaled elite status, but there was more. Bone needles and obsidian blades suggest ritual sacrifice or symbolic tools, possibly representing ceremonies she performed in life or rites enacted at her burial to strengthen her spirit. Her jade funerary mask, assembled from countless small tiles, was not mere decoration. It may have functioned as a spiritual vessel, preserving her face and identity for the journey into the afterlife. In Maya belief, the face mirrored the soul, and the soul needed recognition by the gods. Surrounding ceramic vessels may have contained chocolate, maize, water, or pulque to nourish her in the next world. Items like stingray spines and shell trumpets could have served as ritual implements, calls to the gods, or symbols of spiritual communication. Burial was never simply farewell, it was transformation. The Maya understood death as cyclical, a seed planted in the earth, leading to rebirth in another realm. Kings and queens were seen as living embodiments of the divine, returning to their sacred origins in death. The Red Queen, drenched in the color of blood, entombed within a pyramid, and surrounded by offerings, was being prepared not as a mortal, but as a divine figure, aligned with the cosmic order. Her burial marked the beginning of her legend, not the end of her story. Just steps from her resting place lies one of the most iconic tombs in all of Mesoamerica. In kinship with King Pakal, known to history simply as Pakal the Great, whose tomb inside the Temple of the Inscriptions is celebrated for its scale, artistry, and profound spiritual symbolism, the Red Queen's tomb stands out not just for its contents, but for its location. Her sarcophagus was hidden within Temple 3, directly beside Pakal's monumental resting place, in a city like Palenque, where every temple's placement reflected precise cosmic principles. This proximity was deliberate, a statement etched in stone. Many scholars believe the Red Queen was Sak Kuk, Pakal's queen and trusted consort. Though her tomb lacks inscriptions, the parallels with Pakal's burial are striking. Both wrapped in cinnabar, both interred in pyramids, and both surrounded by jade, treated with the utmost reverence. Their tombs mirror each other, forming two halves of a sacred story. Pakal's sarcophagus famously depicts him descending into the underworld, a cosmic journey of death and rebirth. While the Red Queen's tomb contains no elaborate iconography, its meaning lies in the pairing itself. If Pakal represented the sun, journeying through the underworld to rise anew, the Red Queen may have symbolized the moon, the feminine force tracing its own mysterious path across the sky. Together, they expressed a cosmic duality, masculine and feminine, sun and moon, king and queen. In Maya thought, rulership was relational, not solitary. Cosmic harmony required balance, a principle that extended to the dynastic court. By placing the Red Queen beside Pakal in death, the Maya were preserving not only a marital bond but a sacred partnership. She was not behind him, but beside him, sharing in power, legacy, and ritual significance. Though her name is lost to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures, not as a forgotten figure, but as one of the most enigmatic and influential women of the ancient Maya world. Sealed for over 1,300 years, her tomb continues to whisper across the centuries, prompting questions that grow louder with each discovery. No glyph records her name, no text narrates her deeds, yet the care of her burial, the richness of her offerings, and the symbolism of her cinnabar-drenched remains reveal a woman of profound importance. A consort, yes, but also a figure of spiritual authority, royal lineage, and enduring influence. Today, the Red Queen challenges how we view the ancient Maya world. She reminds us that women were far from silent spectators. They led rituals, governed cities, and shaped dynasties. While kings like Pakal have long dominated the historical narrative, the Red Queen's rediscovery shows that authority was not reserved for men. Power also flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionary women. Her impact extends beyond the material treasures she left behind. It is found in the conversations she inspires among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade ornament, every layer of cinnabar, and every deliberate architectural choice in Temple 3 speaks volumes. These elements declare her importance. What makes her story remarkable is not simply what we know, but what remains unknown. The Red Queen demonstrates that history is not a static collection of facts. It is a living puzzle, a shared human effort to connect with the past. Even after centuries, her presence endures. Wrapped in red powder symbolizing life, sacrifice, and rebirth, her face, once hidden beneath a jade mask, now meets us through the lenses of science, art, and wonder. Though nameless, she remains far from voiceless. shrouded in mystery, she refuses to be forgotten. In life, she may have ruled a kingdom. In death, she commands our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her story etched in silence, yet she continues to speak. Centuries later, another remarkable woman was born. Frida Kahlo entered the world on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant district of Coyoacán, a suburb of Mexico City. Her childhood home, Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a space of color, contradiction, and quiet strength, destined to become a sanctuary, a battleground, and ultimately a museum celebrating one of the 20th century's most iconic artists. Frida was the third of four daughters, born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderón, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish heritage. Her parents were very different. Guillermo was reserved and intellectual, while Matilda was strict, religious, and emotionally distant. From them, Frida inherited a combination of introspection, artistic sensibility, and unyielding resilience. As a child, she was imaginative, outspoken, and endlessly curious, questioning things most adults preferred to ignore. At 6, she contracted polio, which left her right leg thinner and weaker than the other. Though she tried to hide the difference with long skirts, it never diminished her determination. The illness confined her to bed for months, isolating her from peers, but it strengthened her bond with her father, who encouraged her to exercise, ride bicycles, and keep her mind active. Unlike many girls of her era, Frida did not dream of becoming merely a wife or homemaker. Her ambitions were far greater. Frida's ambition was to become a doctor. At just 15, she enrolled in Mexico City's prestigious National Preparatory School, one of only a handful of girls admitted. She quickly stood out, not only for her sharp intellect, but for her rebellious humor, radical ideas, and distinctive style. There, she joined a circle of young thinkers known as Los Cachuchas, debating literature, philosophy, and politics with intensity and curiosity. Even before the bus crash that would redefine her body, and before fame would define her legacy, Frida was already carving herself into the world with fearless ideas, unflinching honesty, and an identity that refused to fit anyone else's expectations. Life in Coyoacán was her starting point, but she was preparing to reinvent herself entirely. That transformation began on September 17, 1925. Frida, now 18, was riding home from school with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, on a wooden bus. They joked, teased, and perhaps argued as teenagers do. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The bus collided violently with a streetcar, splintering wood, twisting metal, and throwing passengers into chaos. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail, which entered her left hip and pierced through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places, her right leg shattered, a foot dislocated, her collarbone broken, ribs cracked, her shoulder dislocated, and her abdomen pierced. She was barely 18. A bystander covered her with a borrowed coat, while another noticed a strange sparkle on her body, not blood, but gold powder from a pouch that had exploded on impact, dusting her broken form in glittering shards. Rushed to the Red Cross hospital, Frida underwent a series of surgeries over months. She spent weeks immobilized in a body cast, lying flat on her back, writhing in pain and uncertainty. The dream of becoming a doctor slipped further from her grasp with each passing day. Yet, in that enforced stillness, a new path began to emerge. Her father handed her brushes. Her mother rigged a custom easel above her bed. A mirror was mounted on the canopy so she could study herself, trapped in plaster and pain. Frida began to paint, not for vanity, but for survival. Her first canvases reflected only what she had, her own body, her own face. What emerged from those early self-portraits was not mere reflection, it was a declaration. The crash had shattered her physically, but it opened a door into her mind, her body, and a surreal language of pain, identity, and resilience that would come to define her art. Through suffering, Frida discovered herself, and through herself, she found her voice. The girl who once dreamed of healing others now began the slow work of healing herself, one brushstroke at a time. Encased in plaster and steel, her body rebelling with every breath, Frida Kahlo turned to painting. What began as therapy soon became a language of its own, a deeply personal, unflinching, and often uncomfortable language, designed to confront rather than comfort. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or serene landscapes. She painted her pain, physical, emotional, and existential. Her earliest works were self-portraits, not from vanity, but because, as she once said, she painted herself because she was often alone and she was the subject she knew best. Using tin panels and wooden boards inspired by Mexican devotional art, she adapted the tradition of storytelling about miracles and suffering to her own experience, turning her body into the canvas and her emotions into an altar. In these works, she portrayed herself split, pierced, bleeding. In one painting, nails impaled her like a modern martyr. In another, she floated in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her fractured spine. She depicted herself weeping, fractured, decapitated, and exposed, yet never passive. Her pain was raw, unsanitized, yet imbued with beauty, defiance, and occasional humor. Each painting reclaimed her body, her experience, and her identity as a woman refusing to be defined by the world. Frida was inventing a new visual language, merging Mexican folk art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolism into a singular, dreamlike autobiography of the soul. By the time she regained enough mobility to walk, albeit painfully, she was no longer the girl who aspired to be a doctor. She had become an artist whose work defied convention and demanded attention. She had transformed her suffering into creation, compelling the world to witness it. In 1928, at just 21, while still recovering and still painting, Frida encountered the man who would profoundly shape her life and art, Diego Rivera. 20 years her senior, Rivera was already Mexico's most famous painter, a towering figure known for monumental, politically charged frescoes celebrating the Mexican people. Frida, long familiar with his work, admired it deeply. Now, she sought his judgment on her own art. Boldly, she interrupted him at the Ministry of Education, where he was painting a mural, and asked directly, "Do I have talent?" Diego looked at her and said simply, "Yes." It wasn't mere politeness. He recognized in Frida a rare, unfiltered voice, raw, unpretentious, brimming with pain, irony, and beauty. Their connection ignited immediately, sparking a relationship as consuming as it was creative. Frida later reflected, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life. One in which a streetcar knocked me down, the other was Diego. They married in 1929, a union that seemed improbable to outsiders. Diego, enormous, politically renowned, and famously unfaithful. Frida, fiercely independent, quick-witted, already navigating life with a cane. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was electric, passionate, and volatile. Diego supported her artistry, encouraging her growth, yet he betrayed her endlessly, even reportedly with her sister, Christina. Frida, heartbroken, pursued her own lovers, men and women alike, rumored to include Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later under terms that preserved Frida's autonomy, her home, her finances, her name. The second marriage was less about conventional romance and more about mutual respect, creative partnership, and understanding. Through betrayals and heartbreak, Diego remained a formidable presence in Frida's life. He challenged her, wounded her, yet also believed in her as an artist, a revolutionary, and a woman redefining the possibilities of painting. Together, they were turbulent but legendary. In the 1930s, Frida accompanied Diego to the United States, San Francisco, Detroit, and New York, as he completed high-profile mural commissions. This journey exposed her to the industrial might, wealth, and contradictions of American capitalism. For a proud Mexican nationalist, a committed communist, and a champion of indigenous culture, the opulence she witnessed, especially during the Great Depression, stirred deep discomfort and criticism, which she recorded in letters home. She scorned the obsession with materialism and appearances, longing for the raw, vibrant, contradictory spirit of Mexico. While Diego painted grandiose murals on factory walls, Frida created intimate, quiet revolutions, small works on tin and canvas. Her style matured, piercing, surreal, deeply emotional, and intensely personal. It was during these years that some of her most iconic self-portraits came to life, cementing her voice as a singular artist of her era. Frida didn't paint herself out of vanity. She painted herself to endure, to survive, to assert her identity. Her body, constantly racked with pain from the bus accident, countless surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, became both canvas and landscape. Her portraits revealed her as fragmented, wounded, exposed, yet her gaze remained calm, unwavering, unapologetic. One of her most haunting works, Henry Ford Hospital, depicts her lying on a hospital bed, tears streaming, surrounded by floating symbols, a fetus, a snail, surgical instruments, and a fractured pelvis. It was brutal, raw, and achingly intimate, a visual testament to suffering-made art. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky into their home during his exile, a daring act of political defiance. Frida donned traditional Tijuana dresses, not merely as fashion, but as a statement of cultural pride and revolutionary identity. Her art, intertwined with her beliefs and her body, became a manifesto, the personal and political fused into each brushstroke. While Rivera celebrated revolution on monumental walls, Frida exposed its human toll, the fragile body, the searing mind, and the indomitable self. By the late 1930s, Frida was no longer simply Diego Rivera's wife. She had emerged as an independent force, an artist whose work radiated raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural rootedness. In Mexico, her Casa Azul in Coyoacán became a vibrant sanctuary of color, contradiction, and creativity. Its bright cobalt walls, yellow trim, gardens adorned with Aztec statues, and roaming monkeys and parrots reflected Frida's imagination. The house was both museum and laboratory, a living extension of her identity. Within its walls, Frida surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, folk art, photography, revolutionary texts, and the vibrant sights and smells of Mexican life. She painted in bold Tijuana dresses, flowers in her hair, incense burning, mariachi music spilling from the streets outside. This era marked an explosion of creativity. Her works grew more intricate, symbolic, and politically charged. In the two Fridas, she depicted a divided self, one clothed in European attire with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous garb, stoic and composed. It was a visual autobiography of love, loss, and heritage. By 1939, her work had crossed borders. She exhibited in Paris, where artists like Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky recognized the originality, intensity, and fearless honesty of her art. Frida Kahlo had become not just a painter, but a living testament to resilience, culture, and revolutionary spirit. Even among the surrealists, Frida remained unmistakably her own. When André Breton tried to claim her as one of them, she resisted. "They thought I was a surrealist," she said. "But I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." Her art was a vivid reflection of Mexico, not the romanticized postcards, but the living, breathing country she cherished. Her canvases pulsed with potent symbols, skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. She celebrated the indigenous heritage of her homeland while confronting the brutality of its past and present. Yet as her artistic voice strengthened, her health continued to deteriorate. Chronic pain, repeated surgeries, and infections became daily burdens. Still, she painted relentlessly, often propped in bed, torso bound in rigid corsets, fingers gripping the brush with fierce determination. Frida had returned to Mexico not to rest, but to reclaim her power through her art, her politics, and her fearless assertion of self. Throughout the 1940s, her body betrayed her repeatedly. Her spine worsened, her right leg was plagued by persistent infection, and over her lifetime she endured more than 30 major surgeries, often in rapid succession. Months of immobilization, body casts, and traction devices became her reality. Yet even in the face of relentless suffering, she painted. Each work was both an outlet and an act of defiance. Her art grew darker, more intense, stripped of metaphor, confronting pain head-on. In the broken column, she presents herself cleaved down the center, nails piercing her flesh, a fractured ionic column standing in for her spine. And yet, her face is serene, her gaze unwavering. Pain was no longer just a subject. It was her companion, her adversary, and her muse. Her political voice, too, became sharper. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in protests, penned searing letters, and openly condemned imperialism and injustice. When walking was impossible, she appeared in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs, shouting slogans, refusing to be silenced. By 1953, Frida finally received her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue recognition of her genius. But her body was frail, and doctors warned she could not attend. True to herself, she arrived by ambulance, carried on a stretcher, positioned in the gallery's center. Clad in traditional dress, surrounded by her own creations, she greeted guests with tequila, laughter, and the same unyielding spark in her eyes. Her final paintings were at once playful and piercing. In one, she depicted herself encased in a steel corset, cradled by the hands of Marx, casting off symbols of oppression. Her last known work was a still life of sliced watermelons, inscribed with the words "Viva la vida," long live life, a final testament to her resilience, creativity, and indomitable spirit. Even confronting death, Frida remained defiant, vibrant, and unyieldingly political. Her final works weren't merely self-portraits. They were acts of rebellion, painted in agony, but always signed with life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo passed away in the very place she was born, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of something deeper. Yes, she had been chronically ill, but she was also weary, worn down by constant pain, repeated surgeries, and a lifelong struggle with her own body. Just days before her death, she had attended a political protest against the CIA-backed coup in Guatemala. Weak, confined to her wheelchair, she insisted on participating, her clenched fist raised in solidarity. Her final heartbeat echoed the revolution she had always carried. Her last diary entry was concise, yet searing. "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her funeral, held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, was a grand reflection of her life. Draped in the red banner of the Mexican Communist Party, her casket was watched over by family, friends, fellow artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable, calling her the greatest love of his life, despite the betrayals that had strained their bond. After her death, something remarkable occurred. Frida refused to fade. Initially, her name circulated quietly within artistic circles. Her work was difficult to categorize, too political for the surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists. Yet over the 1970s and 1980s, feminist scholars and activists began to reclaim overlooked voices, and Frida's presence grew louder. She became more than a painter. She became a symbol of pain transformed into beauty, of feminism, of Mexican identity, and of unapologetic authenticity. Her face, framed by her unibrow and flower-crowned hair, turned iconic. Her home, La Casa Azul, became a museum. Her diary became a cherished testament. Today, her paintings hang in the world's most prestigious museums. Frida had lived much of her life in Diego's shadow, but in death, she stepped fully into her own power. She didn't simply leave paintings behind. She left a mirror, daring us to confront life with courage, honesty, and fire. Her image is everywhere now, on murals, t-shirts, posters, dolls, and digital media. Her unibrow, her flowers, her piercing gaze, instantly recognizable. Yet the true power of her legacy lies not in recognition alone, but in what it represents, the raw, unfiltered reality of living authentically. Frida never sought perfection. She defied conventions, rejected narrow boxes, and embraced contradiction. She offered the world her truth, messy, vibrant, defiant, joyful, angry, and utterly real. Frida celebrated everything that made her unique: her disability, her queerness, her politics, her culture, and transformed it into art that transcended time and borders. She became far more than an artist. She emerged as a global emblem of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and creative resistance, especially for queer communities. A fearless bisexual icon, she lived openly and unapologetically in an era that demanded silence from women. She reminds us that power doesn't require permission, even for disabled artists. She proves that pain can inspire creation rather than halt it. For Mexico, she is a reclaimed daughter, fierce, folkloric, and forever woven into the nation's soul. Her paintings, once criticized as too intimate or unconventional, are now celebrated as masterpieces. Works like Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird and The Broken Column aren't just viewed. They are felt, resonating with anyone who has endured suffering and transformed it into something sacred. Frida lived on the margins and placed herself at the center. She embraced contradiction, the communist adorned in gold, the betrayed woman who loved again, the body shattered yet the spirit unbreakable. Through it all, she painted not merely with color, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never sought to become a symbol. She simply revealed her truth. And in doing so, she reflected the truths of countless others who had never seen themselves in art before. Today, when her face meets our gaze, we see courage, vibrancy, resistance, and Frida, not gone, but immortal.